He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host Taylor, and today we're going to take a little bit of a dive back into the Ogopogo with a very cool update on this local Canadian cryptid. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, as well as our Patreon, where you can get access to early ad-free episodes. And should you want to reach out to us directly, you can send an email our way via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Now, just because it's Monday and we're going back to work doesn't mean it has to be a bad Monday. It can be a very good Monday. We're going to be diving into some content here about the Ogopogo, and I hope you had a great weekend. I definitely had a nice, enjoyable one, relaxing, doing some other podcast work and such, and just some planning and mapping out of our schedule with Reuben as to what we're going to be getting into next with some topics and such. A little bit more Bigfoot stuff is on the horizon, I'm sensing, so it's always a good thing to kind of dive into. The reception has been more Bigfoot related content, so which of course doesn't surprise me. That's the main cryptid, Bigfoot. Everyone wants to know about Bigfoot. So without further ado though, in today's episode, we're not going to be talking about really Bigfoot. We're going to get into some underwater cryptids, specifically, like I mentioned prior, the Ogopogo. So in the Okanagan, we have been experiencing uncharacteristically warm weather for the month of October. It's still hitting the mid-20s, and people are still out at the beach. They're swimming, they're out in their boats, they're enjoying themselves. It sometimes feels like it's still a spring day, or I guess a fall out of summer, but normally by this time, our highways have snow and the windshields have started to really freeze over. But I digress. So of these boaters out on the lake, this past weekend, there was a very interesting situation that unfolded. There's a man named Dale Hanchar and his wife Cuillin, who were out with their friend Myrna Germaine Brown out on Okanagan Lake when they saw it. And I quote, "As a boater, I was just looking to see, is this something dangerous that needs to be marked so somebody doesn't run into it? Like a deadhead or something like that," Hanchar said. "We went on by, and I got thinking about it. And I said to Myrna and my wife, that didn't look right. We've got to go look at that again," he said. So he told Cuillin to get her camera ready and turn the boat around. When they doubled back, they came within 10 feet of this object and snagged a photo. And I quote, "For one thing, the two nodular things are sticking up, whatever they are. Those that are about 3 feet apart," Hanchar said, end quote. Now, this photo will be posted along with the interview on our website's blog, but I think it's worth exploring more on this, as Dale claims to have done more research since taking the photo and deduced that it wasn't a plant, and it wasn't kelp because it's a lake, not an ocean. We can also eliminate the possibility of it being a sturgeon, as they don't reside in Okanagan Lake, and there's been not a single report of one ever existing in the lake. It's not a dead deer either, and that's something that Dale Hanchar claimed himself. As he put it, you can eliminate all these things, but the next question is, what is it? When I look at this image personally that they took, my mind tells me it's too perfect. Although, is this my own disbelief to blame? Imagery of any cryptid is rightfully going to be subject to doubt and rationalizations, like the Patterson-Gimlin footage. But then I wonder just that in this regard, why is there no footage? Why is it just a photo taken? Surely the opportunity was there to record it moving through the water, thus allowing others to make either rational or more observational opinions on what it could be. They used the term too that they didn't want to wake it as if it was like napping. So they wanted to get out of there. And maybe that's another reason it was just all such a quick experience, over and done with within minutes. But I also take into account that they are certainly older folks, maybe not super tech savvy. And I know that I've seen my parents, even, and my grandparents, are trying to swash through between the photos and the video mode on a camera, or sorry, on a phone. It's difficult. It's not a very seamless transition all the time for people in the previous generations. However, I digress. Now, if they are perhaps hoaxing it, it could be a lawn ornament. I saw that term used, and maybe it was tossed into the water, but then I can't make that claim or not. Anyone that's, I'll use the term weekend warrior, anyone that is taking up that title and is just going online and just putting in their 2 cents without properly analyzing it. Granted, experts can only really reside on the photo just like we can online. So they are in a position to make a claim, but a lot of us making these assumptions, we don't have that expertise. We don't have that insight and that kind of backlog of experience on these things. We're just mostly just along for the ride, like me and Reuben, just trying to get down to business and just kind of put our own perspectives out there and just kind of find whatever truths we can in a crazy world. But I digress. So what I was getting to, though, was a man named Adam Benedict. He's a folklore researcher, works with cryptozoology as well. And he stated that he had a moment of hesitation when he was opening up the photo for the first time. He described it as a large water bird of sorts, where the 2 protruding horns are actually feet, and it's diving just below the surface. While I do like this theory, I still am hesitant to agree on that. And I showed the photo around because I wanted to actually get some interpretations and different perspectives. And while some people could kind of maybe see the bird, there were a lot of them, including my wife, just said those aren't bird feet. That's definitely not something else. And then I kind of pointed out what I was seeing in the image. Like, oh, yeah, I see that too. I see that too. Although it seems like a few people, when they look at it, they identified it as being the facial attributes in different parts. So everyone kind of sees it in a different light, which I found very interesting. And again, my opinion on this being a bird, while it's not solely coming from a place of wanting this to be 100% genuine, it's coming from a place of speculation based on how, like I mentioned, I interpret the photo. These 2 protruding objects are very distinguished. To me, you can clearly see an eye on the side of its head, to me, and then what looks like a snout and mouth type feature. The kicker is the shadow of what appears to be a neck descending into the water. Now, when I say that, and you haven't seen the image yet, don't jump to any rational conclusions here. It's not like you can see a full-on neck going down. You see the head semi above the surface, and then you see the shadow, which looks like it could be a neck going downwards. At least part of this object is going down. And it doesn't take long for the light to kind of disappear. If you're going to go diving in Okanagan Lake, you are going to, you'll need a couple flashlights because it'll get dark really, really quick. And I can, that's professionally speaking, because when I've dropped things in the lake and I've had people dive in to grab them for me, it's dark. However, I digress. So if this object was inanimate, that coincidentally resembled the Okanagan cryptid, you would think someone else would have found it by now. Even though our local city is a big one, news travels insanely fast here, especially on topics regarding our lake, not just for tourist takes, but just Ogopogo specifically. And from my experiences on Ogopogo Lake, Okanagan Lake, it's massive. Like, holy smokes, you could easily assume it's the ocean as you're driving by on one of the highways, if you didn't know otherwise. And like I've told Reuben before, at one point, I think something existing here could have been plausible. And it's highly unlikely these days, sadly, though, because of the high frequency of boaters and tourists we see in the lake during the summer months. My gosh, the lake is absolutely full of people. And while we do get, very unfortunately, drownings, we've never had any reports of like injuries from things swimming around underwater, like any cryptid related things or any, again, no sturgeon, but no actual animal attacks coming out of Okanagan Lake. So surely if this was a massive underwater cryptid, we would have seen something by now with our technology and all our tourists, right? While this new addition to the Ogopogo evidence may not prove anything concrete, it does a good job at keeping this cryptid's fire alive within our community. Now, a lot of information is kept secret from us by governments and corporations, but when it comes to Okanagan Lake, the subject matter is pretty open. And what I mean by this is the speculation of underground tunnels. Now, I'm not saying that it is a confirmed thing that there's tons and tons and tons of tunnels going underneath, but as you know, I'm a big advocate for underground tunnels and highways connecting national parks and such, but in this instance, tunnels that connect lake to lake underground. Reuben and I explored this in a very in-depth coverage episode on the Ogopogo when we did our very first episode on our main feeds. You can definitely go check that out. I also did a follow-up episode that explores more sightings of this lake cryptid. But before I continue on, let's jump to a quick ad break and we'll be right back. And we're back. Now, Okanagan Lake has a length of about 135 kilometers, and it hits a depth of 232 meters. While it is speculated that subterranean caves connect Okanagan Lake to other lakes, here is the kicker. Ogopogo has actually been sighted, at least reportedly sighted, in these other lakes nearby. The one I'm going to reference specifically is Kalamalka Lake. Back in 1956, a group of around 25 to 30 American tourists all claimed to have seen the Ogopogo in Kalamalka Lake. It wasn't long before the Ogopogo was enlisted on under the BC Wildlife Act, actually, thus making it illegal to hunt or disturb the species. Although that ship has definitely sailed, if you ask me, or perhaps I should say speedboat away. Now, I wanted to take this opportunity to do a deep dive into these three underwater cryptids in sort of a comparison. So, starting off with our local Ogopogo, this creature is often described as being 1 to 2 feet in diameter. The length of 10 to 20 meters, that's about 60 feet long. And like we spoke to earlier in that very recent encounter, the head has been described as having horn-like protrusions appearing out of the top of its head. But overall, it's got a supposed horse or goat-like head, and reports clock it in at an astounding speed, also having fins, and other reports seem to claim it has feet, and colors range between green and brown. So bear some of those attributes in mind here. Specifically, it's not really reported ever seeing this thing on land. It's always in the water. Next, however, we have Bessie, our famous underwater cryptid from back east in Canada, residing in Lake Erie. Now, this lake very much has sturgeon swimming about in it. And there's been some serious sturgeon attacks as well on people in the news. But in case you didn't know, sturgeons are a fish that can actually grow up to 20 feet in length and weigh over 300 pounds. That is definitely incredible and could result in a consistent amount of misidentifications. Back in 1793, there's a sailboat that was passing through the shallows of Lake Erie Islands. Whilst its captain was duck hunting and admiring the natural landscapes, that is when he saw it. The captain claimed to see an enormous serpent that was just thrashing about adjacent to his boat. He speculated it was startled by his gunshots when duck hunting, but it's reported to be over 5 meters long, which is 16.5 feet. This was the first reported sighting of Bessie. Now, to get back to its description, some folks claim that it had more like a dog-like head, but they do agree on the fins. And that's something, again, like Ogopogo has been reported having, is the fins as well. So we got some common similarities there. And some say they can see human-like arms as well, which is very, very peculiar. As far as colors go, it's been stated to have been either a gray, copper, or like a silvery look to them. Unlike Ogopogo, this creature is claimed to have the capability, again, to exist on both water and land. And that's just mostly due to a lack thereof information on the Ogopogo and what it can actually handle regarding its environments. Now, let's move into our third and final underwater cryptid. I'm sure you can guess what this one is. Reportedly long, thin, usually green-skinned, sometimes with black bumps, a tail and a snake-like head. We're talking about the lake monster Nessie. similar to Bessie, also is reported to have been on land. The first land sighting dates back to 1879 when a group of kids spotted the cryptid together by the Aldery Cemetery. Since then, land sightings began occurring more frequently, although this fact wasn't widely known to the public for almost another 50 years. In 1933, on July 22nd, a couple by the name of Mr. and Mrs. George Spicer from London were returning from their trip to Scotland. As they ventured along the Dories to Foyers Road, about 200 yards in front of them, they witnessed an oddly colored gray object crossing the road ahead of them. Described as a trunk-like object, a large body then followed. The couple clicked in that this was indeed an animated object moving around, a full-on living creature. They watched as it moved across the road and submerged into the water nearby. The vegetation it walked on also was evidently trampled by a large animal, which just provided more credibility to this sighting. This is also reported often as both bracken and weeds in a multitude of other land-based sightings. Now, seeing a creature like this on land easily met with a lot of hesitation, mockery. People are going to judge. But soon after, it managed to have some vindication when a similarly reported creature appeared in a very similar circumstance by a veterinary student named Arthur Grant. Now, this was in the following January from the first land sighting. Arthur Grant was on his motorcycle at around 1 a.m. when he almost smashed into this creature. The description is as follows: a small head, long neck, large body, flippers, and a tail. Having seen the unexpected motorbike, supposedly it scared off the creature back into the loch. More sightings followed suit. And if you're looking for more sightings, again, you can find that other Ogopogo episode that we did where you might be reiterating some information and then providing a whole bunch of new information if you haven't tuned into it yet. So between all three of these things, let's haul out the specifics. Ogopogo is definitely the most different of the three, I would say. While Bessie and Nessie seem to share similar attributes and even mannerisms based on eyewitness reports, Ogopogo reportedly has fins, but it's not very concrete, because then there's lots of other sightings representations that put it as being a complete serpent-like snake. Now, that makes it more different from a dinosaur, where the other two are maybe more in line with that. Now, also worth noting, I have not seen any mention of it being spotted on land, and perhaps that adds credence to the underground tunnel concept of how it can travel to other lakes or massive underground bodies of water, where both Nessie and Bessie have no choice but to head to dry land to find maybe more food, or perhaps adhere to a specific natural component of its existence. I've heard many people claim that, oh, this specific setting and this specific location is impossible to reside in for a living thing. I hard argue on this. I defer to my recent cave experience where we stumbled upon an underground fresh water source that was filtered through the rock, the limestone. It was just cleaning it, making it completely drinkable and way more healthier than tap water, I might add. Now let's use that as an example that in most unthinkable places, creatures can reside. Unthinkable creatures, that being said. If you want more evidence, let's look up the coast of the Solomon Islands. Out in the ocean near Australia and Papua New Guinea, the Karachi volcano. This began erupting underwater back in October of 2021. Using satellite imagery, you can see the discolored water around Karachi on several days in April and May of 2022. So what I'm getting at here, with previous eruptions occurring in 2014-27, and although the volcano does erupt on this continuous cycle, they have found sharks residing inside, leaving people absolutely shocked. Specifically, two species of sharks, one of them being hammerheads, were found living in the submerged crater during scientific expeditions. This area is full of superheated acidic water containing particulate matter, volcanic rock fragments, and sulfur. Scientists also found microbial communities thriving on the sulfur. So, if the Ogopogo, Bessie, and Nessie are all aware of a larger human presence, and I don't mean that they're necessarily self-aware or anything like that, but they're aware of a looming danger, ever expanding on roads and boats up above, maybe they pushed further away, found new tunnels and water systems underground. It's hard to gauge both the life and reproductive cycles for a creature that should either be extinct or hasn't been discovered yet, so we can apply theories based on other similar discovered creatures. Don't get me wrong though, Reuben and I try to do this when it comes to Bigfoot to help clear the air. And it helps bring logic to a somewhat unlogical topic altogether. But until that, the unknown Ogopogo, its head waking up on the shore, or it's reported by another nearby boater, it's too hard to commit to the one that was discovered earlier by the Honchars to be an actual real deal without having been there or seeing it in a video for certain. This is the case with any and all cryptids. Proof could stare us dead in the face, and we will still be met with hesitation, doubt, and disbelief, which isn't bad. Whilst many things about these cryptids can be suspended in that disbelief category, we have to make sure we don't disregard this or anything else and give it a proper amount of inquiry and investigation. And with that, however, that is all the time I have for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed diving back into the Okanagan Lake and researching the Ogopogo with me and his other sea serpent counterparts from around the world. There's still a plethora of other sea creatures to be explored. By God, we will explore as many of them as we can. I just felt that, having already talked about Ogopogo, I know there's only so much that we can really dive into, but sightings that have been occurring have been recent, more frequently and recently acquired. And this one, getting a really interesting photograph of it, really stirred the pot. I thought, okay, I gotta talk about this. I gotta get people's opinions. I gotta share this around and just see what people are thinking. And it was very interesting to kind of get that information back, but I digress. So, if you want to find out more information on the Ogopogo and other cryptids, you can check out our website at CryptidClues.ca. You can also tune in to our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And you can get those ad-free early episodes via our Patreon. If you want to reach out to us directly, you can send us an email via CryptidClues@gmail.com. I guess I should also shout out, we got the Haunt of the Grassman. That campaign has been popping off on our Patreon. We have on our live feeds part 1 and then our part 2 preview that you can access. Our full part 2 is available on our Patreon, and then part 3 we're going to be recording soon here, and that's going to be going live moving forward only on our Patreon. So definitely check those out. Without further ado, that is it. So thanks again for tuning in, and remember, take care and stay safe.